is to review the subdivision committee report. That subdivision committee met on February the 19th to review the request for preliminary plat approval of Village at Hendrix Phase 3. I was the chairman of that subcommittee for the day. We reviewed the request as brought by Chris Thornton. It was an expansion of the Village at Hendrix, the backside, a continuation. There were no active approvals required. We reviewed in detail with the planning department. There were no concerns or changes requested. That preliminary plat was approved, subject to completion of the full punch list. Any questions? All right. So now to the public hearing portion of our meeting tonight. As a reminder, the Conway Planning Commission makes recommendations to the City Council on public hearing items. The City Council will make a final decision on these items using the Planning Commission recommendations as a guide. Items reviewed at tonight's Planning Commission meeting may be considered by the City Council as early as March 26, 2019. Items not approved by the Planning Commission may be appealed to the City Council within 30 days after Planning Commission denial. If an item is appealed to the City Council, a public notice sign will be placed on the property at least 7 days prior to the City Council meeting, and a public notice will be placed on the city's website at conwayarkansas.gov. The first item on tonight's agenda for the public hearing item, let me continue to move forward, is going to be the request to rezone from R2A to R2 and HR at 1106 and 1108 Donaghy Avenue. So we've asked the planning department to come up and review the request in front of us briefly and give us their recommendation.
Yes, so this property is at the corner of Donaghy and Duncan. The sort of left half of the property, which you can see on page 8, is Tract 1, will be R2. The right half of the property, the east half of the property, which is Tract 2, will be rezoned to HR. So what this is being done is to accommodate a future lot split on this property so that Tract 2 can be turned into a buildable lot for a residential house, a single-family residence. So the way that the zoning is configured with this, basically with the duplex on the west lot and the single-family home on the east lot, that's as intense as these properties would ever be allowed to get with that. So Tract 1 would be approximately 7,500 square feet. Tract 2 would be approximately 5,500 square feet. So if this is approved, it'll be followed by a replat, which will be reviewed internally by the planning department staff. This is really consistent with a lot of the pattern of development that we've had in that area of town of trying to encourage infill development. So as such, the staff recommends approval of the rezoning based on its consistency with the comprehensive plan and its compatibility with the surrounding uses. It'll permit a prevailing development trend in the neighborhood and it wouldn't result in harm to adjacent property.
So James, talk to us about the HR zone. Typically, when things come before us that are already in the historic district, they've been in the historic district for whatever, since the creation of the code. This is the first one that I've seen that we're trying to move something into it. So what all is included in that zone? Why is the special zone needed for Tract 2?
Okay, well actually, so the HR zone it's a relatively underutilized zone that exists in the zoning code. It's not actually moving it into the Robinson district. So the HR zone is totally sort of completely separate from that. But what it is that the HR zone has a smaller lot size requirement than with any of the other zones. And so we directed the applicant to apply for HR on Tract 2 because it would enable them to meet the lot size requirements without coming in and requesting any variances. And so that's really the reason for that. It has nothing to do with historic, and it's not being moved into the historic district at all.
Outside of lot size changes, are there any specific differences from the HR zone versus, say, the R2 zone that Tract 1 is going through?
Not really, no.
Okay.
So with track 2, the proposed is to be the zone HR, is that in consideration to this ditch? Is that why you can't?
No, the ditch would be, part of that's a drainage easement, but the entirety of that 57 by 100-foot lot would be HR. So obviously, there are going to be some constraints for the applicant in the future in developing it, but that's really not part of the consideration.
Okay. But they're aware that it may pose some problems with developing?
Yes, yeah, we have voiced that getting over the ditch is going to be pretty costly in terms of a driveway and things like that.
Yeah. Great. Anybody have any questions for the planning department before we get to the public portion? Thank you so much. So for the public portion of tonight's events, we will give everybody who wants to speak for and against the matter in front of us plenty of time to speak in front of us. Each person the first person to speak for or against an item will be given 10 minutes. Each subsequent speaker for and against the item will be given 2 additional minutes after the first initial speaker. When you come up to the podium, please state your name clearly and provide us your physical address. So for the first person that would like to speak in favor of this request, please come forward. Mr. French.
I'm Bobby French. My office is 1021 Front Street, Conway. I'm representing Mr. Rory Thompson, who's working on this project, and basically what James said, I mean, we're just trying to get that lot and get some infill in that area. There's a big lot kind of behind that duplex they own there, and they are aware that we're going to have to, design some kind of box culvert or something that will meet Finley's approval, and but that's not. I mean, it'll be expensive, but it won't be, too bad where they can't do it. I mean, it's not going to prevent them from cost effective. It'll still work out. Basically, that's it. I mean, the R2A or whatever is just on the front, on the duplex. That's an existing duplex. That's why it stays that. And we'd appreciate y'all's approval.
So
Anybody got other questions?
Rory already owns that first?
He owns the whole thing.
Okay.
And he's just wanting, I mean, he's done several other projects downtown, where they, a lot of those lots are, like that particular lot, he just has south 100 foot of it or something, but it's 130 foot wide, so you can, most lots downtown are 50 foot wide,
So if you build a structure on track 2, how will they gain access to it?
We'll build they'll build some kind of box culvert to get across that box. We've already spoke with the street department, and I mean, we feel comfortable that
So
we
it'll
can.
be off of Duncan Street, I guess?
Yes, they'll be coming off Duncan.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. French?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else to speak in favor of this request? Okay, anybody to speak in opposition? Bring the request into committee. What do you think, commissioners?
I don't have a problem with this. I mean,
Yeah.
Any concerns?
Looks good.
But it seems like they are not.
I'll entertain a motion.
motion to approve?
I'll second.
I have a motion by Brian Quinn and a second by Brooks. All those in favor? All those opposed? So carries. All right, moving on along to item 2 on the agenda for tonight is the request to annex around 55 acres located at Dave Ward Drive and Thomas G. Wilson Drive.
Yes, so this is called Malley Village. It's just east of the Lewis Crossing development. And what's unique about this application is the applicant is sort of asking annexation, but at the time of annexation is also requesting sort of zoning above and beyond A1. So there's a tract of land, about 2.92 acres, that the applicant is requesting to be zoned C3 as part of the annexation. Although it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan in this location's outdated because it indicates industrial. that sort of predates the fact that we've had a major commercial development out there. And so staff really views the zoning of that tract of land to be largely consistent. We would anticipate in the future that as more of the area is developed, that more of it will be zoned or be requested to be zoned some form of commercial or office or multifamily as well. In terms of looking at this, we've kind of run the traps with Conway Corp. They don't have any opposition to this. Looking at it would be largely consistent. It's surrounded on the north, west, and south sides by the city limits. So in a lot of ways, staff views this annexation is making a lot of sense.
Okay.
So from your experience, because behind that is a pretty heavy industrial area, so you have the Kimberly-Clark shipping facilities back there, you have FedEx, you have Arkansas Box, and all of those that are back there along Thomas G. Wilson and even on around through Amity. What have you guys seen as an appropriate buffer from what is moving from a heavy commercial area with heavy pedestrian traffic and just retail traffic going into that heavy industrial? Because this will can essentially continue it down.
Dave Ward.
Yeah, Dave Warden's going to create a weird box in there where you're going to have these very large trucks interacting even more with commercial retail shoppers.
I mean, you know, I think based on really the way that Thomas G. Wilson's currently configured, it's not advantageous for a lot of commercial traffic to come out that way. I would anticipate that more of that is probably being routed down and around to Mayor to get out, just simply because once they put the double roundabouts in,
It's hard to make a left turn.
it's
there, too,
it's nearly
even in a car.
impossible. Yeah, in that area. And so I think probably from a traffic standpoint, there's not as much of the conflict between truck traffic, because I assume that most of it's probably going to be moving somewhere else. From a buffer standpoint between those different uses, it's really going to depend on how the remainder of it ends up being configured and platted. That's something that, you know, planning and the Planning Commission will really need to review and look at that pretty carefully in the future. That's important about this is that this annexation request is coming before a platting request that will be coming to y'all. The applicant had deferred that platting application to the future, and so see a little bit more of the piece of the puzzle in the future months as it comes along.
Sure.
But really with the piece that's on the northwest corner going to commercial and the remainder of it just being agricultural, in a lot of ways is
So it's just
Pretty-
that northwest corner that's there's C3,
yeah.
and
So
the rest of it's still A1.
So
That's
52
agricultural,
acres.
right?
agricultural, yeah. So it's about the least intense zone that might be
And
anticipated.
they're
So
not even trying to make it R1 or something yet, or, I mean.
no, well, I mean the thing is, if it were to go R1, all of it's probably likely going to be rezoned to something else.
Gotcha.
And so it's just setting up a situation for that property to be rezoned in the future, which means subsequent review by the Planning Commission and City Council. So this is really mainly just about the annexation
Get the
with,
utilities and all
there's
that.
only one piece of the property that they kind of have an idea of what might go on there. And so they wanted to get those land use rights vested now as part of this to streamline the process.
Is this just for annexation only?
For annexation and the,
And the rezoning? Okay.
for, to C3 for that 2.92 acres.
So, until somebody comes to us and requests to be annexed in, we don't really proactively go about annexing property in, do we?
The city council can.
So there's three ways that property can be annexed. The first would be a voluntary annexation, which this is what we call 100% voluntary annexation, where the applicant is coming to the city, says, please annex me, going to the county and say, please release us from the county jurisdiction and allow us to be annexed. That's one form. There's what's called an island annexation, which essentially means that the city has completely enclosed a property. So this property is pretty close to becoming an island. If there was on another side, on the eastern side, that property was annexed over there, then this would become an island. By the vote of the city council, through an ordinance, the city council could vote to cause that property to be annexed. So that's what they call an island annexation. And then the third method is the election method, where basically the council comes up with a map and says, we're going to annex this area, we want to call for an election. Council calls for an election, and then that election's held, and it's voted on by the residents of Conway plus the residents of that area. And sort of the overall, if it's 51% that approve of it, then the area becomes annexed.
Gotcha. Because we got a lot of, I mean, on that page one, that map looks just odd.
It's very, very, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we would be coming back if there, with agriculture would be changed, but right now it's just the 2 point something acres would be commercial, right?
Yeah,
Which
they
on
would
the
have to come
front,
back,
and you said north,
that northwest.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions for the planning department? Thank you. All right. The first person to speak in favor of the request, please step forward. Please state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Scott Shellhorn. I'm an attorney with Mitchell Williams Law Firm down in Little Rock, 425 West Capitol Avenue, Suite 1800. I here represent Dr. James Thomas and Malley Farms, and we're here, as Mr. Walden has explained, on the voluntary annexation of this property. We're following a relatively new procedure where we first, it's 100%, as I said. You make an application to the county then goes through its processes, comes to the city after being approved by an order from the county judge at the county, and then we move through. We're actually removing this simultaneously so that once the county approves the annexation there, then we can move quickly here in the city. Keep in mind that when you annex property, it has to have some zoning designation, so that's why we're here with that, is that we were there in that corner would be the commercial zoning, and then the rest is just a placeholder, frankly, that you guys will get another bite at when we come back to try to plat the property.
Do you have something planned going in that C3 stuff? Have y'all got stuff lined up?
There's certainly items in mind that I'm not fully aware of, frankly. That's at the owner-developer level. But yeah, there are things bubbling at this moment.
Okay.
And I have, outside of questions, I have no other presentation to make, but certainly willing to answer any questions you may have. I'll ask for your favorable vote. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else to speak in favor of the request?
Anybody else in the room?
Anybody to speak in opposition of the requests? You laughed, but Beth stood up that one day and surprised us.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not next to my property.
That's right.
Seeing as there's no opposition, I'll bring this back into committee.
More tax money for Conway. No problem.
I think it's good.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve.
I second.
Okay, I have a recommendation by Brian Quinn and a second by Ray Williams. Any further discussion on the request? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? So carries. Thank you, sir.
Oh, did we ever adjourn without Andy?
Good, because we have some things to talk about.
Oh, we did, yeah, how about the new thing that Conway City Council, is that?
So are you
Can you talk about
adjourning
that?
and then we're going to discuss?
Nope, not even going to adjourn. We can keep it an open topic. So there was a request, or there was an ask, I should say. So James, in his previous role, has offered to provide some training to the group if we so desire. So as his previous role, maybe I should let him just fully explain.
So I'm involved with Arkansas APA, the Arkansas chapter of the American Planning Association, and one of the things that we do is hold 3 different sessions throughout the year to doing planning commissioner training. One of the things in my previous life as a consultant is I did a lot of planning commissioner training for planning commissions. Basically laying out what the role was, giving you a little bit bigger idea of planning and whatnot as it relates. So I just wanted to provide that as an option, that usually it takes about an hour and a half that we could do on a special evening, or before a meeting or something along those lines. But we could do sort of my standard spiel, or we could tailor something that if you all have particular questions about the way that things work, because Conway's planning process is fairly unique. And so if there's things that you have questions about, or things that you're like, why do we do it this way or that way, we could do a workshop type environment and have those discussions. So just kind of wanted to throw that open, see if that's something you all were interested in doing, and kind of take it from there.
Yep. So I've seen the deck, and obviously it's very thorough and extensive, but I didn't want to commit anybody's time, because it obviously is going to be above and beyond what we already do today as commissioners and give our time back. But I wanted to at least bring it up to everybody, let everybody voice their preference, and if there was enough preference, we would find a time whenever it made sense, whether it's before a meeting on a month where maybe we don't have subdivision committee, maybe we can squeeze it into maybe an hour format, or maybe a month where it's not as heavy of an agenda and we do it at the end of the agenda. But seeing as it is going to be extra time, I wanted to bring it up for the committee.
I mean, I read my book, the whole thing front to back.
You read that whole, wow.
But I still think I
hate
could
it.
probably still use the training on it.
Yeah, I would say if you do it, then do it before, like when we don't have a subdivision meeting. I think that would be.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then not
That'd be the
heavy,
best time.
yeah.
Okay?
And not a heavy agenda if we can get the two combined.
Yep.
Okay.
They would've been-
So we'll put it back on you guys a little bit.
Okay.
If you can find, if there is a month where we don't have subdivision committee meeting, if we can possibly squeeze it into an hour, that way we can fit it in the 6 to the 7 time frame before the meeting, that would be perfect. Give us a little bit of heads up, that way the people that aren't on the subdivision committee meeting and aren't used to getting here a little early can plan around and can fit it in their schedule.
Sounds good.
Could you do it,
Perfect.
like 2 times this year?
In case you can't make the first one.
Yeah, you said your spiel is like an hour and a half.
What do you mean,
I would
like,
think
put
it'd
it
be
in
something
half?
you do.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can condense it down, because there's certain things that I cover that we don't necessarily have to cover.
Okay.
Things that talking about, we can talk a little bit more about some of the practical things. What are questions that you should ask in terms of, rezonings or conditional use permits? Or when you're reviewing a plat, how does your role function a little bit differently than with rezonings? Because there are 2 distinct different hats that you all as a planning commission wear when you're reviewing things like rezonings, conditional use permits versus how you're reviewing things when you're looking at plats. And so those are really important to think about. So I can tailor down. I will drone on at end about history if you want me to, and background. But
Thank you.
it's actually pretty interesting stuff. Paradigm shifts and whatnot. But
What happened with the House bill? Do we know?
the Senate Bill 170,
Yeah.
it ended up getting passed. It is now law, and I think the impacts of it aren't completely known in terms of what impacts it will have. I think just based on the way that our regulations are constructed right now, it's not really going to have a huge problem, but it could potentially, if we start changing things in the old Conway overlay, that it might cause some problems for us. But one of the biggest things that I was concerned about is plan unit developments. So a lot of times when someone comes in with the plan unit development, we typically have a trade-off where smaller lot sizes in exchange for having a sort of a higher quality housing project or product. And so that ability to negotiate with developers with voluntary agreements was preserved in the bill. That was very, very, very important, and that's something that fortunately people that offered the bill were willing to make that amendment that made it a lot more palatable, so.
Yeah.
I don't think the sky's falling, but it did jump down just a little bit.
I think it'd be a good idea for everybody to do that at least one time, and I think it'd be a good idea if we can make it part of like new committee members, commissioners coming in, like to have that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
good
that,
time of year when
because I mean, I
everybody-
know I, especially my first year, I could have definitely used it. It was kind of like a lot at once.
Sure.
I mean, just my opinion. I think it's a great idea.
What the two?
Great.
Never can stop learning, and
Very true.
Anything else you have for us?
That's it.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a first.
The second.
I have a second by Brian Townsend is the first one I heard. Sorry if someone else